It is happening. The constitutional crisis legal experts have been warning about is happening right now. It's unfolding in real time as we see the Trump administration outright ignore a federal court order and is daring the judiciary to stop them. We talked about this on the award-winning bonus show yesterday. All awards we give out, I admit it, but many awards have been won. Over the weekend, 2 plane loads of Venezuelans were deported under Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. And a judge explicitly ordered those flights to turn around midair. The administration refused. They didn't do it. They said the ruling doesn't apply because the planes have already left U.S. airspace. They are not subject to recall. Now, some are thinking about this as an immigration issue. This is not just an immigration issue. This is the president of the United States openly defying the judicial branch and sending the message, court rulings don't apply to me. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has challenged judicial authority. Remember that his administration aggressively fought against court rulings on the mass firings of federal workers, on freezing federal funds, on blocking asylum claims, on revoking automatic birthright citizenship. We are at a tipping point, and I try to avoid being hyperbolic on this show, but I also try to avoid understating a crisis, and it is critical to understand why this is a crisis. When we say threat to democracy, it is not a vague, nebulous thing. When the White House ignores and disregards specific, concrete court orders, you must do X, and they ignore it, we have to look at this as what it is. There are serious legal questions surrounding the deportations that go even above and beyond just ignoring the court order, which themselves are arguably a crisis. There are really 4 additional legal issues here. Number 1, the legal basis that the Trump administration is using for these immediate mass deportations is something called the Alien Enemies Act. Legal experts say completely improper usage simply doesn't apply here. Gangs are not foreign governments, making the legal justification very shaky. We have not declared war on these countries. The legal justification just doesn't apply. Secondly, did the administration violate a federal court order? Because if so, officials could face sanctions or even be ordered to reverse the deportations. Number 3, what about due process? Many of those deported were not given proper hearings. They were not given access to an asylum claim, and there are civil and human rights concerns there. And then fourthly, what about international law? Trump laughs at international law. The U.S. appears to have deported individuals to El Salvador without clear consent, and that is also potentially a breach. Now it gets to the sort of nitty-gritty. If courts rule against the Trump administration, they might say, you've got to bring back the deportees. However, how on earth do you enforce such a ruling, especially now that the deportees are in El Salvador? And Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele has said, we're not sending them back. So understand that this is not normal. Previous presidents, Democrats, Republicans, they have battled court rulings. Sometimes we agree with the administration when these battles take place, and sometimes we don't. But ultimately, prior administrations have complied with court orders. Trump is pushing the limits further. And why wouldn't he? Because he's gotten away with everything so far. And if Trump can get away with ignoring court rulings on immigration, what would stop him from doing the same thing on elections, on congressional subpoenas, on constitutional rights? So we are at a real stress test for democracy here. If courts cannot enforce rulings, checks and balances collapse. And that is the real crisis here. Trump is betting nothing will stop him. And you know what? I think he's probably right, because nothing has stopped him for years. When we talk about the framers of the Constitution establishing checks and balances, we also acknowledge they never thought that the American people would vote in a charlatan like Trump who would flout every norm, law, and regulation. Plato knew it. Plato was worried about democracy, which he believed ultimately would lead to the most ignorant and uninformed buffoons, my word buffoon, not his, ignorant, uninformed buffoons electing a president, and then that president would be a fiasco. Plato predicted it a long time ago. Framers of the Constitution didn't think the American people would ever do it. Well, they have. And now what we are up against, as we saw in term number one, and we are seeing now, is that the constitutional checks and balances, the systems that we have in place, even the judiciary seems unsuited in terms of really having the teeth to make Trump do what they declare and what should be done. So what is next? You really can't blame Trump, because if you get away with 9 things, wouldn't you also try to get away with a 10th? It's also, finally, really important to understand that Trump is really the kind of final manifestation of the direction that things started going since the civil rights era. I write about that specifically in my book, The Echo Machine, which will be out in a week. We are down to the final 7 days before the book is out. I worked very hard on this book. I think it's critical to understand how we got to where we are, and that's part of what the book does. I would love for you to order it, available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any local bookstore can get it for you. The latest is that there are 1,100 signed copies spoken for at Brookline Booksmith. They're having me sign 200 more. Those final 200 signed copies you can claim at davidpakman.com/booksmith. We will take a break. Massive dumps after the break. No, it's not what you think. Once again, Donald Trump's cabinet picks are all about loyalty over expertise. Election denier Carrie Lake to lead Voice of America, the government-funded broadcaster meant to report unbiased news. Ground News found hundreds of articles covering this story, which is an app I've trusted for years to help me critically analyze the news I consume. Our sponsor, Ground News, doesn't tell you what to think. They show you each news outlet's biases, credibility, financial incentives, so you know who's benefiting from the spin they put on each story. You can even filter out certain sources you don't want, so you can stay informed without getting buried in the noise. Trump is shaping our future in ways that will last decades. And if we're not paying attention, we will allow history to repeat itself. So stay engaged with Ground News, who is fixing what is breaking right in front of us, the trust and transparency in the media. Ground News is giving my audience 50% off the same Vantage plan that I use. Go to ground.news/Pacman. The link is in the description, or scan my QR code.